Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining. It's really a complicated topic tonight in the sense that I'll be touching on some very sensitive feelings, and nothing is taboo from a Torah point of view. We are not afraid to talk about, and I say we, Torah scholars, I'm not putting myself in that, but Jews should be not afraid to talk about all kinds of feelings. And in fact, it's very important to talk about feelings. So in Shir HaShirim, written by Shlomo Melech, he says that all earthly feelings that we experience are only to help us understand the only thing that really exists, and that is the love of God. So God has created feelings. He's given them to us to help us understand ourselves better. But at the end of it all, or underpinning it all, it is for us to learn how to love God. And Mishlei, also King Solomon says, above all, guard thy heart, for out of it come forth the issues of life. So the Torah way of thinking of being is not to be stoic, and is not to pretend we don't have feelings, and is not to cover up when we're jealous or angry or miserable. It's to acknowledge those feelings, but then to do something about them. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. As I said, some of the topics, like grief, is not easy to talk about. And I am going to be saying things, a lot of it comes from Rabbi Pliskin's book, Gateway to Happiness. They're things that other rabbis and great sages over the generations have said. They might sound a little bit blunt, and I apologize in advance. They're not my thoughts. But as I said, we can't avoid talking about things, and we can't avoid the fact that people do die. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about it now is because we are living through an epidemic, pandemic. People are dying. We all know people who are sick or dying. It's brought it very much into our focus. And a lot of people are not coping very well. In general, death is a hard thing to cope with. So the question is, what is grief? What is sadness? What is depression? Are they all the same? Are they different? This is what we're going to explore today. And I am going to give you the Torah view on how to look at these feelings, some of which, as we say, are very difficult. Now, they're not the same. They're actually very, very distinct. And this also adds to this idea of knowing what you feel. So this is a theme that I talk about over and over again. Use your words carefully. How you describe your state will make a big difference. So if you're a little bit stressed and you say you're anxious, you will feel much worse. If you say you're depressed and you're really sad, you will feel much worse, and so on. So the idea is that you need to watch your words, and you need to be very specific about what you're feeling, because when you do, we now know this actually from a neurobiological point of view, when you articulate and name a feeling, it actually helps you resolve it. That's why we always tell children, use your words, or what are you feeling? But as adults, we're also not so good at that. So when we actually spend time to go, what is going on inside? What is it I really feel? Then it's a stepping stone to changing, to growing, to doing something about it. So grief or mourning is very different to depression. And this is what Rabbi Pliskin says. Mourning takes hold of one's heart, but not one's mind. Depression takes hold of one's mind. Mourning leads to thinking. Depression stops one's thoughts. Mourning stems from light in one's soul. Depression comes from darkness in the soul. Mourning arouses one to life, but depression brings the opposite. The Torah obligates us to mourn when appropriate, but forbids depression and insists that we serve Hashem with joy. So there's a big difference between mourning, grieving, and depression. I love the expression, morning comes from the light in one's soul. And it's something that I've often seen and I've heard when people, especially if they've been with someone they love who's passed away, they've often felt, especially if it's an aging parent, felt it was quite a spiritual experience. And the whole, what one goes through during it, a lot of people do feel a lightness of soul, and often it's only months later that a depressed or really dark feeling comes along. Whereas depression is always dark, there's never that lightness. So grieving, Hashem says we must grieve. If we lose someone that is close to us, it's actually a mitzvah to grieve, but in a very prescribed way. We know there's pain. We're not meant to be stoic. And I have met people who, when they've lost relatives, have thought that if you from or if you believe, you just like chug along and you're okay and you accept Hashem's will. It's not like that at all. When you lose someone you love, it's like a limb has been amputated. You've lost a part of yourself. And it is appropriate that you feel grief. And it is a sign of your love for that person. It's a sign of appreciation for them and for the relationship that you had. But the Torah says, Hashem says, don't be frommer than me. I prescribe what needs to be done. You don't have to do more than that. So, for example, there are limits. When we lose somebody, let's say a parent, we are told there are 3 days for weeping. So out of the 7 days of Shiva, the first 3 days are the most severe. There's 3 days for weeping. There's 7 days of Shiva, which are for eulogizing. Then there's Shloshim, which is 30 days, where there are still external signs of mourning. And then the rest of the 10 months, because we mourn for 11 months, we are not to have excessive external signs. So with that, Hashem gives us a prescription of how to mourn for our parents. If it's a spouse or even a child, it's only 30 days. Now, this can be very hard to think about, but Hashem has given us a prescription of what is appropriate. And because we serve Hashem with joy, we accept that that is the correct way of doing it. So one of the reasons that one of the things that can help you is it always comes back to Emunah, that you believe that there's another world. We believe that that world is a better place. And so we know it's also not the end. We know that the person we love has gone to a better world, and we know that we will see them again. The proper attitude, if you're grieving, is to guard your own health and to serve Hashem with joy. That means you keep even the mitzvahs of Shiva, and that's a merit for the deceased. So it's not our way. I've sometimes seen it on movies. I'm not an expert in other religions, but I have seen in movies, I know it's a great factual evidence, but this is where I'm getting the source from. People throw themselves into the grave, or I've seen apparently there are widows who wear a black band for 7 years. It's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is we focus on life. We focus on getting on with life. So even when we are, God forbid, grieving and sitting Shiva, we still need to eat. We still need to look after ourselves. We're not meant to tear our hair out. We're not meant to go hysterical, because our health is important. We are the ones who are alive, and we need to guard that, and we need to accept Hashem's will with joy, that this is what was meant to be. And although we have the pain, at the same time, there's a level of acceptance. When we lose someone we love, it really is about accepting Hashem's judgment. What we say is Baruch Dayan HaEmes. We don't even say Baruch Atah Hashem. It's a short Baruch. It's blessed, the judge of truth. We're accepting that God runs the world. And in the midst of our deepest pain, that is what we're saying. God is justice, and he's doing the right. He's done not the right thing. We can't understand it, but what's meant to be. Now, we learn that also from Aaron. Aaron's 2 sons went into the Mishkan. They shouldn't have gone in the way they did, and they both died. And it says in the Torah, Aaron was silent. And we learn from that His silence was he didn't rant and rave against God. Did he feel he'd lost 2 arms? I'm sure he did. Was he devastated? I'm sure he was. But it's about being silent in terms of accepting Hashem's will. Now, the more we learn and develop our relationship with Hashem, all the time I'm talking about in our shirim, really understanding Hashem runs the world, Hashem has a plan, all those things, it does help. Doesn't take the pain away, but there's a level of acceptance that this is the way that it's meant to be. And that's the first thing you say. When someone you love dies, the God of judgment, God of righteousness has decided this is how it's going to be. Now, the other thing that, I don't know if I want to say it's helpful. I don't know what I want to say. It's a hard one. But I know when I lost my father, it really came home to me. To really understand that all relationships are temporary. Part of our biggest pain is we have an expectation that relationships are going to go on forever. We all wish our parents would live forever. We all wish our children would live forever and certainly outlive us. Our friends, the people we love, we would love everything to stay the same. But the truth is, relationships are temporary. It's very painful. But when you internalize that, it really helps because it takes away the expectation and the demand that this is going to go on forever. It's not. The only relationship we have that is permanent is Hashem. Hashem is with us from the beginning to the end. And you read this, when I read Holocaust stories, a lot of the great Rebbeim, like the Rebbe of Ger, he lost his whole family, 13 children and a wife. He had to start all over again. Those relationships were temporary. And why people like him shared their story, what he would do is if someone lost a child, he would go to a Shiva house and just sit there, not say a word. And he said to somebody once, I hope that I'm giving that other person comfort because they've just lost, let's say, 1 child, and they look at me and I've lost 13 children, and they can feel, well, if the rabbi can cope with that, then maybe I can also cope. So it's a way of really supporting each other through these difficult times, but realizing that all relationships are temporary. Now, the other thing that helps is to have meaning. Viktor Frankl, he developed his theory of meaning, man's will for meaning in the Holocaust. And he tells, it's a very famous one, where someone came to him and was very, very upset. He was very close, madly in love with his wife. They were married for, let's say, over 50 years. And his wife died first. And he went to see Viktor Frankl as a psychiatrist. And he said, I can't accept it. I'm all on my own. I'm really, really upset that my wife has died. And Viktor Frankl said to him, they tried to explore, can you find any meaning? And Viktor Frankl said, what would have happened if your wife had died first? Sorry, if you had died first. And he said, no, my wife would never have coped. I'm stronger than her. And then he felt comforted. He said, actually, it's better that she's gone first because I've taken that pain away from her. Does it mean he didn't miss his wife? Of course not. Does it mean he didn't have excruciating pain? No, he had that. But because he had some meaning, it wasn't a religious meaning, but a meaning that it's good that it happened this way, he was able to cope better. So we can always find some kind of meaning that helps us. We also need to comfort each other. When someone is grieving, it's very important that we go and comfort them. It is a mitzvah to be menachem ovel, to go to someone who's sitting shiva, and afterwards. And I do want to just spend a second to say, it's not a tea party. Just like we know 3 days off for weeping and 7 days off for eulogizing and so on, there are laws about when you go and help someone who's sitting shiva. And one of them is, you don't go there to have a cup of tea. You go in, and in fact, the law is that you don't greet the mourner. It's up to the mourner to greet you. And if the mourner doesn't start chatting to you, you can just sit quietly. The mourner sets the tone. It's not, I'm not the 3rd time I'm saying this, but I get very upset when I go to shiva houses and it's a tea party, because if you've ever sat shiva, sometimes, on the one hand, it's a distraction, but it's not the purpose of shiva. The purpose of shiva is that you are meant to go and talk to the person about what they've gone through, what the person they lost was like. It's meant to be a healing process of the grieving. It's not to be, let's just go and have a joke and I'll cheer you up. It's not that at all. So sometimes people don't know what to do, and it's very good to ask other people, but to really get it right, because we need each other during those times. And in fact, that's what we say when we leave someone who's grieving. May Hashem comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. It's about the other people who are mourning, other people who've been through this. We are a community, and may Hashem comfort you. Also, don't think it helps the person if you go and start telling them your story. When someone is raw, they've just, let's say, lost their father, it doesn't help to tell them what happened when your father died 10 years ago. It's not your time. That is not helpful. You're going to be there for the other person. So that is what grief is. Grief is about mourning for a person, but it's a process, and you come out on the other side. And one of the reasons you come out is because Hashem comforts you. We probably couldn't do it without that, but it is a precept that you will be comforted. And so if you walk around going, I'll never get over this, I'll never cope, you will just make it much worse. But if you see this as a process that millions of people have gone through, and you will get through it, and Hashem will help you through it, and community, you will get through it. And I want to share with you something that I said. I was interviewed recently. I might have said this in the shirim as well, because people don't like to talk about it. But death anxiety, which is also why I wanted to talk about it, has become a major source of research, because a lot of anxiety researchers believe that death anxiety underpins all anxiety. So I was interviewed about how to talk to children about death, and I had just read up all the latest stuff. And again, I felt like I felt at the beginning of the year. I wanted to apologize and say, look, I'm not this unfeeling person. However, this is how we do it. So what the latest, it's not so new, but the way of talking is that when a child says, Mommy, are you going to die? What parents normally goes, no, I'm never going to die, I promise you. That's not true. Hopefully you won't die, you can say, and you can say statistically I'm this age and it's unlikely, but there is a small chance. That is more truthful. But then what you say to the child is, but you're going to be okay. Who would you go to help you? What do you think you could do? And you talk about what the child might do, and maybe you'll both cry. Doesn't mean there's no pain, but that's much more helpful and helping the child being resilient than if the child wants to talk about it. Well, who would you go to? Which auntie would you like to go? Would you like to stay with dad? And maybe it's a once-off discussion, but don't be afraid of these discussions. It's very important. Now, the same thing, I often hear people say, if my mother dies or my husband dies, I'll never cope. That does not help you. You need to be able to say, I will be devastated, but I will cope. I will manage. I won't be the first person who's widowed or lost a parent. I will get through it. And believe in yourself to cope, and believe that Hashem will comfort you. So grief is a pure emotion. It's a primary emotion. We need to have it. And it's a process that you can and will work through. So if you're grieving the loss of somebody, that's okay. And trust it will come to an end over a period of time. Now, we should not be grieving from a Torah point of view over like a lost job. People use the word, now I'm grieving. Even a pet, sorry for those pet lovers, you can be very, very sad and you can grieve for a short period of time, but we should not put the two in the same category. Grief relates to losing someone who is close to us, and it is a process, and you will move through that process. It will only be complicated if you fight it, or if you're saying these things I'm saying when you become angry with God, or you say I'm never going to get over it. Those things is what we do, we call complicate grief. Again, I'm not minimizing the pain, but I'm saying this is what happens. Now, what is sadness then? So sadness is also a primary emotion. It's something we all experience, and it can be appropriate when, for example, we hear some sad news. Let's say we're in pain, or we get a diagnosis, or someone we love is not well. Those kind of things, it's appropriate to feel sad. Now, I'm not talking about things like, because we've been over and over this is coming up. If a regular thing happens, like you don't win a lottery, or you've got a job but you don't get the job that you want, from a Torah point of view, it's about accepting Hashem's will, seeing the good in it, believing it's good. It does not even have to be sad. Sadness relates to other things, like relationships, like pain over things that are not happening that should be happening, like being well and healthy and having good relationships. So, as I said in the beginning, if you're feeling sadness, think about what it is that you feel, allow yourself to feel it, name it. And at some point, you need to think about what you want to do about the sadness. You're still serving Hashem with joy. You're not fighting that level. You're not saying, I'm not keeping kosher anymore. I'm not going to be nice to people. You're serving Hashem with joy, but you're feeling the sadness. However, temperamental sadness, using Miriam Adahan's word, meaning when there is an excessive response, when it keeps you in a way that is inappropriate, is when you're sad because you can't get what you want. You don't have the house that you want. You didn't get the ring that you wanted. That becomes temperamental sadness. It's inappropriate sadness. And from a Torah point of view, it's not okay. Those are the kind of things where you need to go, you know what? This is not really something one should be sad about. It's actually something I have to work on myself so that I don't get sad about these kind of things. In the Torah, this was actually one of the sins that happened to the Jews while they stayed in the desert for 40 years. The spies went, 10 out of the 12 spies came and said, they've got giants, everything's big, we're never going to win that war. They weren't meant to go as spies, they were meant to go as tourists and just have a good look at the place. And only 2 said it was going to be okay. And everybody started to cry. They chose to listen to the 10 and not the 2. And Hashem said a very enigmatic thing. It's quite a worrying one, because Hashem said, you are crying when you shouldn't be crying. And so I will give you reason to cry. Now, it's not like a child where you say, if you cry for no reason, I'll give you a smack and then it's not that. What Hashem was trying to teach them is, you're not in a mental state of understanding what is important, what we cry over and what we don't cry over. And I have found this very, very useful, when you're upset about something, to actually go, is this really something I should be wasting tears over? And the majority of things that upset most of us most of the time really don't need to have tears. In fact, what they need is for us to find a different way of looking at it, find a way of being resilient. We're just sad or upset because we're not getting what we want. But in the scheme of things, it's like a child crying because their sibling won't share a toy or their little matchbox broke. That's what we often cry about. So it's a really deep idea to go, why am I crying? The Jews had been promised by Hashem it was a land of milk and honey. The guys actually came back and said it's an amazing place. The grapes are huge. Everything's wonderful, except we don't believe in ourselves that we can cope. It was really, Hashem had led them the whole time in a safe way. Nothing bad had even happened, but they started to cry in anticipation. And that's what we also sometimes do. We're crying in anticipation. We're creating this whole story of what's not okay. And there's nothing to cry about. So we have to be very careful that the sadness we feel is appropriate and that it is not temperamental sadness. So we've got grief, which specifically applies to when someone close to us dies. We have sadness, which happens at appropriate times, like if we've been given a diagnosis, or we've hurt ourselves, or someone we love, something sad has happened to, we can feel sad about that. But most things that are just we're not getting our own way, or something material, that becomes what we call temperamental sadness. And what it leads to is inertia, and we become very self-centered. Now, the third feeling we're going to talk about is depression. Now, I'm not getting into a whole clinical debate of what clinical depression and endogenous depression and melancholic, it's not a clinical discussion. I'm talking about depression where we have no hope. Depression is a level of I won't even call it sadness, but a kind of sadness. It's like a darkness where we feel hopeless. We feel life is not worth living. And often we feel helpless. We don't feel we can do anything to change it. Life is bleak. So sadness, we feel sad. We have terrible pain, even grief. But life, we are living. Depression is when life is not worth living. And God forbid, the end result of depression is suicide. So the idea is that from a Torah point of view, depression is not allowed because depression comes from your Yetzer Hara. It's a part of you that brings you down and stops you from functioning. It's a part of you that loses faith in Hashem. In fact, the Chazon Ish says it's actually idol worship. You believe in your Yetzer Hara rather than believing Hashem, who has made us promises. So depression is a very serious thing, and it's something that is not at all acceptable. Now, I want to give you a little bit of some interesting ideas. Martin Seligman, many of you might know him as the father of positive psychology, and that started in 2003. But long before he did that, when he was a researcher, he looked at animals, dogs, and one of his first books was called Learned Helplessness. And then he wrote a second book, well, I don't know which, but it was in quite a long time ago, called Learned Optimism. It's a book worth reading. And what he found was that there are three main ways that an optimist and a pessimist think differently. And he basically spoke about, if you start with pessimism, it leads to depression. So the theory about it is this, is if you start off with one negative thought like, I'm no good, and you keep thinking I'm no good, and you add on to that, I'm useless at that, and nobody loves me, and whatever, you develop and change your chemistry until you think life is not worth living. So this is a real difference between the way we work together. But if you really had to try and separate out, psychiatry would look at it as a medical model and say your biochemistry is out of whack, and that makes you have negative thoughts. Seligman and the whole body of psychology is about you have negative thoughts and that changes your biochemistry. We use both. I'm not anti-medication, but basically the idea is to stop the thoughts before they just get worse and worse and worse. So I'll tell you what he discovered. There were only three main differences, and these are fundamental, as you'll see, to leading to depression. He called them the 3 Ps. I'll go through them with you. Let's say, for example, 2 people buy shares on the share market. One's an optimist and one's a pessimist. This isn't a joke, by the way. It sounds like it is, but these are serious terms, a real optimist and a pessimist. They buy shares on a share market, and the next day, the World Health Organization says there's a pandemic and everybody's got to shut down, and the stock market crashes and they both lose a lot of money. The first thing the pessimist will say is, this is permanent. It's always going to be like this. I'm never going to make money. The optimist says, it's temporary. Tomorrow's another day. Morgen's noch a dag. I will wait. The share market's always up and down. There can be a bullish market another time. It's temporary. So the first P is permanent. The pessimist believes it's permanent. The second P is pervasive. The pessimist says, this proves I'm a total failure. I get nothing right. The optimist says, it proves nothing about me. It proves that maybe I'm not good at choosing shares, or maybe my timing was out. So there's one area which I messed up on, but I'm still a good person. I'm a good mother. I'm a good daughter. I'm a great dancer. I'm a great friend. I'm a whole person, but there's one area. So pervasive pessimistic thinking means I take one negative, I lost money, and it proves that I'm a total failure. And the third P is personal. The pessimist says, poor me, this only happens to me, I'm the victim, God's picking on me, it's all about me. And the optimist says, it's nothing to do with me. The whole world was affected. Millions of people lost money. It's not personal. So to summarize, the 3 Ps are permanent, pervasive, and personal. Now, what happens with all of those thinking, what Seligman discovered is, if people are pessimistic and something happens and they interpret it using one or more of these thoughts, it can lead to depression. And you can see why. Because permanent means it's never going to change. And in fact, I had someone saying that to me today. Everyone's getting very edgy now, understandably, because they don't see an end to the pandemic. We don't see an end to the shutdown. When we feel it's never going to end, we feel much, much worse. So when you're going through a hard time and you think your pain is never going to end, then suicide often feels like the only option. When you feel something's gone wrong and it proves that you're useless, you're just a total failure, well, life certainly isn't worth living. And if you think only your life is bad and God is picking on you, then certainly you will also feel very, very bad. So depression is something that you want to notice your thinking style and you want to block it as soon as you can. You want to challenge it. And I'm going to help you challenge it by giving you now the Jewish and the Torah ways of looking at the 3 Ps. Hope is one of the biggest things that help us not be depressed. Now, I'm going to actually put it up on the WhatsApp for those of you who didn't hear it, but Rabbi Jonathan Sachs gave a most beautiful 12-minute talk, Erev Tisha B'Av. Now, as I said, Tisha B'Av, one of the reasons it came about is because the Jews were crying, and many things then happened on the day that they cried. It actually became Tisha B'Av, became a very, very sad day. What Rabbi Sachs was saying, Erev Tisha B'Av, is it's an incredible thing that Jews never gave up hope. For 2,600 years, it's mind-boggling, Jews believed that we would rebuild the temple. Now, we haven't rebuilt it completely in the way it's meant to be, but they always knew we're going back. We say, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, cut off my right hand. Like a Jew cannot forget Jerusalem. And he was saying that the paradox, what we read, one of the prophets that we read, Jeremiah, on Tisha B'Av, it's full of, if you actually read it, it's just doom and gloom, and describes these desolate cities. And Rabbi Sachs said it reminded him of what he felt our world looks like with the lockdowns. It's a bit like Melbourne looks now, the streets are just empty. And he was saying, in Paris, like during the busiest streets, the Arc de Triomphe, dead, quiet, nobody there, London, all the places, Trafalgar, we used to busy, was just desolate. And he said this is what it reminded him of what Eicha described. And yet the same prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, who at the same time are doom and gloom, at the end of it all, they end on a note of hope. So Isaiah, who talks about all the different things that went wrong, how they suffered, ends with the famous one that's now in the United Nations that says there will come a time when nation will not raise sword against nation, where the lion will lie down with the lamb. All those things is right at the end. So how did they do it? And what was that? So Rabbi Sachs says in 1967, he went to Jerusalem for the first time. And he said he stood on the very same place where the famous story of Rabbi Akiva took place. So the story of Rabbi Akiva was, he was walking with some students and it was desolate. The Kodesh HaKadoshim was just desolate. The whole temple, and they started to cry, and Rabbi Akiva started to laugh. And they said, Rabbi, how can you laugh? He said, well, why are you crying? They said, we're crying because it's desolate. We were somebody, we had the temple, Hashem revealed himself, and now look at it, it's desolate. And Rabbi Akiva said, well, I'm laughing because the same prophets that said it's going to be desolate also gave us hope that it's going to be rebuilt. So I'm choosing to focus on the hope. If they said this is going to happen, then it means the second part is also going to happen. And what Rabbi Sachs says is that Jews have given hope to the world. It's our biggest contribution to the world, is this idea that you never give up hope. You never, ever give up hope. And he said when he was standing there, he thought if he had said to Rabbi Akiva 2,600 years before, Rabbi Akiva, are you going to be able to wait 2,600 years? Is it going to stop you from, are you going to give up sooner? And he said, he knows Rabbi Akiva said, no, however long it takes, I believe, and it is going to be better. It is going to change. And he said that was his moment. He realized Jews have been praying for this moment for 2,600 years. It's finally happened, but not for one day did we give up hope. Not for one day did we stop praying about next year in Jerusalem. Every day we spoke and speak about returning to Jerusalem. He says this very beautifully. I won't do his eloquence justice, but he says this. What is lost can be regained. What is destroyed can be rebuilt. What disappears can return. Time is a narrative. We need to see beyond the immediacy of history. We need to have hope over the horizon. So this is it. Those of us that are struggling with the pandemic, we're tired of lockdowns, we're giving up hope. I spent time with people this week. I left feeling depressed. Well, not really, I'm using the wrong word. I left feeling stressed. What did I really feel? Uncomfortable, not happy with the negative views, but I wasn't depressed. I left because this woman kept going on about the economy and the illnesses and the hospital and the government. And every time I tried to say something positive, she had 10 more negative things, and it made me feel worse. It was contagious. It was not really good. You don't want to surround yourself with people like that. It's never, ever good. But it's very easy. I don't blame her. It's easy. The economy, people are out of work. I notice on TV or on news, they're always giving personal, terrible stories. This young girl I heard on the news, on the radio, she needs chemotherapy in Adelaide, and they've shut the borders, and now she can't get her chemo. Like heart-wrenching stories, one after the other. And it is very easy to say, is there going to be an end? And the world is going to collapse. That's what this woman was telling me. It's the end of the world as we know it. We're always going to be bankrupt. We're never going to come right. Our children are never going to get jobs. I hope you're not all catching this and feeling terrible. I don't want you to leave here feeling worse than you started. So I'll just repeat what he said. As Jews, we know that what is lost can be regained. What is destroyed can be rebuilt. What disappears can return. Nothing is too hard for Hashem. Whatever we lose can eventually come back, and we actually believe better, and we are never to give up. Never, never, never. Our parents and our grandparents never gave up. They always had hope that we would return to Jerusalem. We are the lucky generation. We have Israel. And as I say, I know the temple isn't rebuilt, but we have seen one miracle after another. And hope is what gets us through. Depression is hopelessness. We can be sad while we're living through difficult times. We can grieve when people we know die. And we can be sad that people have lost jobs and need help. But our focus has to be on living. And our focus has to build. And he also quotes, he says, apparently it was an early Zionistic quote I thought was beautiful. To build and to become rebuilt. And this is my parting message. I want to just go into this. When you build, you become rebuilt. This is the paradox. People often believe that we're better off if we go and relax and we don't involve ourselves and we go to some salon or some retreat and no. The way we actualize ourselves, the way we build ourselves is by building others, by building the world. We build and we are rebuilt. So I want to tell you a story I heard from Rabbi Jacobson. He was talking about the importance of Jewish lives. He was talking to a group that help people so they don't have abortions, and the preciousness of every single life and why it's so precious. Everybody's so precious. And he told the story but a man, Sol, I'm sorry, I don't remember his surname, who was very, very generous and always was looking out for everybody else. And one day, Rabbi Jacobson asked him, you know, you've got such a generous spirit and you're always helping everybody. Why do you do this? Is there a reason? And he said, yes. He said, I'll tell you what, I was born in 1923 and I went to Auschwitz and I was standing in the queue to go to Mengele. And a man came up to me and he said, when were you born? I said, 1923. And this man said, no, you were not. You were born in 1925. I said, no, I was born in 1923. And the man said, you were not. I was at your bris and I remember you were born in 1925. So Saul said, look, my father told me I was born in 1923. He said, is your father here? I'm here. I'm telling you, you were born in 1925. Now tell me, when were you born? So Saul said, 1925. He said, good, you got it. Got up to Mengele. Mengele said, when were you born? He remembered what the man said to him. He didn't know why. He said, 1925. Mengele sent him to the right, and that saved his life. If he'd said 1923, he would have gone to the left. It would have been the end of his life. Saul said, that man was an angel. I never saw him again, but he saved my life. And I decided that I'm going to become an angel. I'm going to look out for anybody who needs any kind of help. And I'm going to be there for them, because you never know whose life you're going to save. You never, ever know. And this is what we need. We are going through very, very difficult times. But that's not what our focus should be. Our focus should be, this is what Hashem has given us today. What can I build? Who can I build? I promise you, when you are calling other people to build them up, when you are giving to other people, when you are remembering what people are going through, just a call, you have no idea what it does for them, but you also have no idea what it does for you. That is what your focus needs to be. The one thing is hope. This is going to come to an end. As I said in our very first share of this, everything's happened before. I know everyone says unprecedented. Yes, this hasn't happened for 100 years, but it has happened before. Plagues have happened, and it does come to an end. Everything we're going through. So if we talk about the 3 Ps, from a Jewish point of view, we know that everything is temporary. Shlomo Melech says, to everything there's a season. There's a time to love and a time to hate, a time to live, a time to die, time to sow, a time to reap. Beautiful, beautiful quote. This is the time we're going through now. Things are temporary. Even our relationships, as I said earlier, are temporary. This is the day Hashem has given us. What can we do to build? But it is temporary. It will come to an end. Isaiah knew. He saw the destruction of the temple. He didn't know it would be 2,600 years, and I hope it won't be 2,600 years this time. But whatever it is, we are not going to give up hope, because we're Jews, and we give hope to the world, and we have lived through things before, and we need to know that it is temporary. The second thing we need to know is that even if we make mistakes or we have bad days, it does not mean the whole of us is bad. In fact, we have a godly soul that can never be damaged, tainted, changed. We are always connected to Hashem, and we're going to be having Rosh Hashanah soon, and we will be reconnecting to that side of ourselves. That we have a godly soul, and we have a godly purpose. And yes, we can make mistakes, and we've got to fix that. Maybe we shouldn't invest in the stock market. Don't do it again if you're not good at it. But does it mean you're totally useless? Does it mean your life is not living? Absolutely not. Every morning, Hashem says, here's your soul back. Your life is worth living. And the third P, personal, is a little bit more tricky, because it is and it isn't. It's personal in that we believe in divine providence. Every one of us is going through exactly what we need to be going through. But it's also a group thing. So we know that Hashem has promised that Jews as a whole, we will never be wiped out. It doesn't mean, unfortunately, that individuals don't die, but as a whole, we're a group. And what happens to us is a group. Hashem isn't just picking on us. The whole world is undergoing a pandemic. So when we take it personally, The only way to take it personally is the specifics are meant for us to grow. So as I said right in the beginning, the feelings that we have are meant for us to grow. They're meant for us to attach to Hashem. Hashem has given us feelings so that we reach out to him and understand ourselves better and improve the quality of our relationship with him. But it's a very beautiful idea that we build and in that we get rebuilt. And we know that no matter what's been destroyed will be rebuilt. And I have every confidence based on this, that the world will be rebuilt. We are going through a time of change. We are going through a time of crisis. We're going, I believe, through a time of transformation. And these times are always difficult. It's difficult to go through transformation because we're used to certain things and we don't know what to expect. And that's when digging deep into hope and knowing that Hashem is running the show and he has a plan, even though we don't know what to expect. And one of the ways that we can look at it is, it's a very interesting thing that when you're with a young child and you ask, let's say you have a young child in the days that we traveled, and this child of 2, the mother flew through the whole of Europe and stopped at Paris and Rome and The Hague and a whole lot of places. If you ask the child if the child could speak, where did you go? The child would go, nowhere. I was with mom all the time. The child doesn't know those journeys mean nothing because the child is safe and secure with mother all the time. And that's how we're meant to feel. Hashem is our Father and he's holding us through all our journeys. We feel like we're jumping from this to this, but if we're in our relationship with Hashem and we're serving Hashem and we're building, serving Hashem with joy, we will feel held. And it doesn't matter on one level what's actually going on outside because he's carrying us. He's holding us through this whole journey. So these are very deep ideas. One has to be very careful not to sink into depression because the more you sink in, the harder it is to come out. So really one of the main purposes that I spoke about this is an awareness. Is this grief? Is it sadness? Is it depression? If it's sadness, is it temperamental sadness? Then stop. Is it appropriate sadness? That's okay. You can go through the process and it needs to come to an end at some point. But if it's depression, you need to put in the work to not go down that line that you think life is useless, hopeless, that you feel helpless, that you can't manage. Whatever help you need to get, you need to get. But if you, as Seligman says, identify the kernel of the thought right in the beginning, that's the time to stop it. And the beauty is, the Torah has all the answers. When you go, this is permanent, the Torah says, no, nothing's permanent, it's going to change. When you think it's all me, Hashem says, no, 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 you're part of a bigger picture, you're part of a community. We have all the answers, and they really are optimistic answers. And we have to perhaps all develop an Isaiah part of us, the part of us that can see the doom and gloom and cry over it, but know this is a transition. We're going through history, but there's a light, literally. There is something at the other side because Hashem has promised us. Hashem has promised us that there will be a better time. And we say that we're in the footsteps of Mashiach. We are coming to the end of time, and we need to believe it. Look at our ancestors. They believed it, and we have today Israel, and we have Jerusalem. It's an amazing thing. And that's where we also learn from the people, our community, what they've been through, and to see what has come out from building, from focusing on the future, and from living each day with what we've been given. That is really the key. To drop the temperamental sadness that I've got to be sad if I don't get what I want. No, this is what I've got. How do I serve Hashem with happiness with what I've got? We need to all strengthen each other. We need to be each other's angels. There are times that I feel bad and I need you, and there are times that you feel bad and you need me, and we should be interdependent and aware of each other and support each other, because there are times that I feel strong and times that you feel strong. We really, really need to be there for each other during this time and know we're part of a much, much bigger picture. This is a very important time of the year. We've moved through Tisha B'Av, and we are now going into Elul. Just a little bit of an ad. I'm going to be talking on Wednesday morning Sydney time on Chabad.org on a practical approach to Teshuvah, so that we're prepared for Elul, that we can maximize Elul and then even more maximize Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But even this, we go through Tisha B'Av, which is very, very depressing, sad time. We're allowed to not feel depressed. Sorry, I'm catching myself out. It's a very sad time because we actually don't believe that it's the end. We actually believe that in the destruction of the temple, it's like demolishing your house so that you can build a new house. So the destruction of the second temple is the beginning. It's the demolition for the beginning to build the third temple. There's always the seed of hope, even in the destruction. But even in terms of time, as I said, it's a narrative. We go through Tisha B'Av, and now we're moving into Elul. It's about regrowth. It's about returning. It's about starting up again, a new year. So everything is moving forward. There's always potential to grow. And the main thing is never, ever to give up hope. We say, even if a sword is on your neck, do not give up hope. We are Jews, and we have hope. And we always believe there will be a better future, but we're not waiting for it to come. We're making today great by building ourselves, building others, and being angels for one another. So thank you all for coming, and please God, I will see you all in a month.